with Renee. Saturday with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more. Saturdays with Renee.
All right, what's up, world? Welcome back to Black Liberation Media and episode 112 of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe. Put this in your socials. We got a big show for you. Renee, how you doing this week?
I'm good. How are you? I'm here. Just hold on I'm here, everybody. But give me 1 minute because I'm in the car. Hold on. But you go. And plus our guest is here, so we can get started with that.
Yeah, no problem. We will get started. We have a couple of guests. And just quickly make sure if there's any confusion over the view you are getting of the show, make sure you have selected your preference for the portrait or landscape view, and the title with the little phone symbol at the end lets you know that is for the what is that, the portrait view, and then the other one is landscape. So just so you're clear, you should be able to get both, and I'm still not clear why both populate the way they do, but that's just it. So, but all that said, again, like, share, subscribe, make sure you have the bell rung, and you're supporting the Patreon as best and as much as possible. Now, with that, we have a guest joining us briefly to talk with us about tonight's 10th anniversary of event celebrating 10 years of Pan-African community action. And I believe Johannes is here to do that. Good morning and welcome to the program. Congratulations. Good to see you.
No, thank you. I appreciate you having us.
So as I pull up the event taking place tonight, and again, congratulations, please tell us about what's happening and what has brought us to this celebratory moment.
No, absolutely. So we're Pan-African Community Action, a group of diasporic Africans organizing institutions of power for our people in Washington, D.C., Southeast in particular. It's really important that we find ourselves in the Southeast, not just because of the founding of PACA, housed in our initial campaign, the Justice for Zoe campaign, which I look forward to speaking to a bit. But in addition, Southeast has the highest concentration of Africans, Black people in D.C., so it's called Chocolate City, but further and further, due to our domestically colonized position and relationships to this particular empire, in our home of DC, we see about almost 90% of Ward 7 and 8 east of the river are African folks, and so we see health disparities in that relationship that reach up to 15 years gap in life expectancy from folks in other wards on the other side of the river, and so we find ourselves in the Southeast. And we organize out of Southeast because our folks are best positioned to understand our colonial relationships to this empire, as well as the best to understand what we need to do and benefit from what we need to do to get out of that, to get out of this particular situation. And so today's event is just celebrating 10 years of organizing. Any organization making it 10 years, let alone a revolutionary one, given all the threats and contests to our work. Is something to look back on and really see what's going right and see what we can do more of in the following 10 years to continue to help our people struggle to win.
Right on. And big salute. I see Son of None is set to perform. I'm a big fan for a long time. So salute, and everybody who's going to be there tonight is in for a treat. For if just for that alone, one of the best MCs to do it, and we're fortunate that he's in this area. So good luck and enjoy that. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the foundation of the organization. You said Justice for Zoe, and maybe even just a little bit more about the importance of this taking place in Southeast. though you've pretty much laid it out, but it is just important to note that I was in Northeast recently, and I was like, wow, this is very different. It's very different.
Yeah,
So yeah.
No, absolutely, absolutely. My mom, even before I was an organizer, my mom and I used to joke I wasn't allowed off the porch for such a long time. Even when I was, I had to be within eyesight.
Mm.
And then you go around all around the district, and you see 11 o'clock at night. You see folks walking their dogs with their babies by themselves and everything else. So it's interesting to say the least. Justice for Zoe, Alonzo Smith was killed by a 27-year-old brother was killed in late 2015. And mind you, this is coming off of the backs of a slew of very popular killings of unarmed black folks across the country. Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, and Michael Brown, of course. And so while DC was responding to this moment, you know, as many of us across this particular empire were, no one was responding until Alonzo Smith. No one was responding to an instance that happened so close to us. And so that proximity allowed us the opportunity to step in and capture and act and direct some of that anger, that righteous anger, of course. And so MPD was being very cryptic in their interactions with the community, with the family of Alonzo Smith. And so PACA stepped in and organized the Justice for Zoe campaign, in which it was founded on a few demands. Two of which are particularly important and carry us through to today. But aside from just accountability for those involved in the killing and transparency on what happened in that instance, in that killing itself by special police, a pair of the demands were that demanding a full investigation into the death of Alonzo, as well as transparency, demanding transparency from Metropolitan Police Department. And so we wanted an independent investigation from the Organization of American States, as well as the UN. That's important because we understand it's important to internationalize our local understanding of things. That's part of what PACA's role is as a vanguard organization. In addition, we put on the table a demand for full community control of the police.
So no. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, so I mean, following that moment, there's a working group. There was a working group, a UN working group of experts of people of African. The UN working group of experts on people of African descent. We actually hosted a town hall. We were the hosting organization for their visit, and we hosted a town hall in which the community and individuals and organizations within the community, were able to come and be heard and testify as to the conditions, as to their dismay with interacting with MPD on a regular basis, and sort of getting that on the record was huge. And that was a big part of what PACA's efforts were in that moment. Aside from just getting Alonzo Smith's case on the record, we got, because of our primarying of community control of the police, we got CCOP listed by the UN Working Group as one of the official recommendations back to the U.S. government. So when we think about the Black radical tradition, when we think about struggling with an internationalist lens, when we think about moments through the 20th century, such as We Charge Genocide, these are the types of concrete steps that our organization took to contribute to that legacy, not just for legacy's sake, but for material benefit, for the desire to see better for our people and to contribute to the struggle.
Right on. So again, folks,
can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
So
sure.
Just out of my own curiosity, and thank you, and sorry for the confusion at the start, John, is when you joined on. But the UN report that you're talking about, what year was that? Like 21? I'm trying to think if it's the same report that I've been tracking all this time, because there was another one that followed. There was an initial report, like a commission that was put together, and I'm just trying to figure out if it's the inquiry report for that same commission where they ended up finding the U.S. Guilty of prima facie and crimes against humanity. Do you know if it's the same one?
I don't want to misquote. I'll make note of it, and Renee, and I'll definitely make sure to get to you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. But I'm really curious about this, and I love this idea of bringing the community in and having a town hall to have this conversation. And the reason it's sticking out in my head is because I know for a fact that community control was one of the recommendations that came out of that report, but there was another one that followed. So this is just my own nosiness and curiosity. So
No,
you
no
don't have to
worries.
forgive it.
And I would be remiss if I didn't share it. Like, so part of PACA's understanding, part of our understanding of the issues is that we need power, right? Like, our people need power. We're struggling for power. We're not trying to contest uh, simply to be liked or something. We're not trying to contest for folks' imaginations of what an African is or what a Black person is or what have you, a colonized person. We're not trying to change their minds per se. We're trying to capture. We're going to change our relationship, our people's relationship to power. We're trying to build the institutions of direct democracy. We're trying to help our people understand that we are capable of providing for our own needs, that the outcomes of whatever institutions that we build or whatever institutions are serving us at a given time, the outcomes aren't as important as the process. They're equally as important. So power to PACA, in short, is the ability to define our own priorities as a collective and enact programming based on those priorities and defend those priorities, which is as important as those other two steps. We understand ourselves as Pan-Africans because we understand that without the freedom of the diaspora in whole, as well as the continent and its inhabitants, we can't be whole. It's impossible to be free. This is grounded in materialism. This is grounded in the views of scientific socialism as well. So we understand that whatever we build in this world to come, or whatever we build in process of getting there, has to answer for the collective needs of all of our people.
That's dope. And I hope folks are able to make it out. Is there going to be a means to like support and do the material support for PACA from outside of the DC area for folks who can't make it there in person?
Yes, so absolutely. I can actually share the donation link, but in addition, you are able to register at pacaturns10.eventbrite.com. PACA turns the number 10 .eventbrite.com. As Dr. Ball said, it's going to be an excellent showing. Sun and None just popping out. That's excellent in and of itself. You're going to be able to learn about what PACA is developing for the struggle to come. You know, we just made it 10 years, but we look forward to making it 10 years and beyond that until we win. Right? Music, food, an opportunity to step up and really understand what's next, how PACA is meant to develop. Like Beverly Smith's going to be there, the mother of Alonzo Smith. So it's really important that we highlight the community. This isn't simply about the organization; it's about the work. It's about the community that's carried us through this 10 years, and the community that we hope to build into the next 10 years while we struggle and connect these struggles to other folks struggling elsewhere, both in the country and internationally. This work doesn't stop, and so this is just another step to look back and really share an appreciation for what folks have been able to contribute to and the work, and really center the work that we're trying to push forward. We're going to be talking about our community control of health program. We're going to be talking about our popular education program, the Assata Shakur Study Group. So I can share those links as well. We're going to be at Dar Al Hurriya Palestine House of Freedom. That's 650 Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. this evening. So it's going to be an excellent time. Please, I'll share the Stripe link just now, but no, I appreciate you asking.
So the Eventbrite link it was put in the chat. It's also in the show descriptions, so people can sign up there, register, get more information, and I believe find ways to donate through that link as well. And yeah, salute and congratulations again.
No, I appreciate y'all. Thank you for having
10 years is big. Thank you. Thanks for joining. And is there anything we missed before? I'm sure you have a day full of things to do. I
just appreciate my comrades. Something I want to make clear is that the pair of you, as well as I've met Dr. Ball a couple times. We chopped it up, so that's always great. I just appreciate the fact that y'all are doing this work, and then really highlighting as well that there are folks that are doing different work that you contextualize very excellently. Like, we got to be on the ground, interacting with our folks, developing institutions of dual power and community control, so that our folks can understand that we are able to take care of ourselves. We are able to build the world that we want to see, that we talk about all the time. So I keep it up. And lastly, I want to highlight that I'm only able to do this now because there are folks such as yourself, in particular, Dr. Ball, me following your work for some time now. There are folks that have been in this, that have learned lessons, that are able to guide our own development. So as long as you're doing that and you're understanding in that tradition, it's important that you're able and willing to step into that tradition so that in 10 years from now, whomever else is able to learn from myself and y'all's continued work, there's a space to do that. Because we understand that that's under assault all the time. It's not guaranteed that we go into an upward trajectory. So I just appreciate the time to speak to some of the work that we're doing in Southeast, and I hope you have a great day.
Likewise, anytime, and thank you very much for what you're doing and coming through, and again, have a great time, and yeah, congratulations, 10 years of PACA, folks. Link is in the show description. And peace, Johannes. Good to see you again. Peace. All right, everybody, please like, share, subscribe. Make sure you have the bell rung. Support the Patreon if you can. And again, the link to tonight's event for PACA is in the show description. And yeah, it's an honor to support efforts like that. And I'm glad to see that they've made it this far. And that they're standing firm at a time when, you know, Pan-Africanism isn't as appreciated as it should be. Many different assaults on it. So salute to that effort. Renee. Yeah,
so
go ahead.
So this at random. So I want people to understand that PACA's 10th anniversary, like aligning with Ben's being the guest today, was like the universe aligning, because a lot of what's in Ben's book is about self-defense and community control and looking at the history and working within the community. So I don't know if you had the ability to read, and I will admit I'm not great with reading like comic books. Like I struggle. It's like too much on the page for me. I think it's just my own like thing. I'm used to words. so I struggle with comic books. But this was so much of what PACA is doing with organizing and being in community and trying to get people to understand that we can learn to take care of ourselves. Like this is like it's an actual thing. That is what Ben's book is about, and that we highlighted PACA, who was doing that work on the same day, was just like the universe aligning. So I just wanted to point that out because I wasn't really expecting that. Like it wasn't intentional, but sometimes the universe just does the thing that you need it to do. And I don't know if Ben's ready or not. If you are, Ben, you can take your camera off. I don't know if he walked, if he had to walk away or whatever, but
yeah, I'm not sure either. Yeah, there he is. So Ben Passmore, welcome to the show. Good morning, and congratulations on this great comic. Yeah, I did get a chance to read a good portion of it. Just didn't get not to finish it. It's fairly long, but Black Arms to Hold You Up is its title. Ben, congratulations and welcome.
I love that you do that.
Thank you.
It was long. It's a book.
I mean, it's long. So, but I mean, even for a comic book, I mean, because, what I was thinking was as a comic book, as a kid who kind of grew up reading comic books, I mean, the average comic book wasn't that long. That's all. But that's not your fault. That's my fault. And I'm just admitting I didn't finish it. That's it.
So if we could, as we normally do here, Ben, if you could,
it's dealing.
Sorry, if you could introduce yourself first. Now that I think about it, because I don't, we shouldn't assume that people know everything. So if you could first introduce yourself, talk about how you got here, how you ended up in this craft, and then we can talk about, and then you can go into the book. But I want people to know who you are first. So, allegedly a cartoonist. I just realized which
Allegedly.
I love it. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is a delay. We're gonna have to.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's maybe my fault. I apologize for that. I'll just leave a bunch of time in between when y'all, but sorry about that. And is the audio okay outside of the delay?
So what we might need to try to do is have you go off camera like Renee is and just be on with audio. That might help because there's a lag and a delay. I don't know if that'll help, but the audio seemed to be okay when it wasn't being cut off.
Okay. How is this? I turned the camera off.
It seemed I'm not sure in terms of the lag, but it and it seems to, yeah, we hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess there's a delay, but maybe I'll do the introduction and we can have these gaps of, I guess, meditation in between in between talking. Um, but I guess I'll introduce myself to anyone who hasn't read my work at all. Um, I am I am a cartoonist, despite the allegedly I've been a cartoonist maybe for 15 years, doing mostly nonfiction comics, things that were called like comics journalism. I spent a lot of time during the rise of the alt-right, writing comics about political violence, anti-fascist movement things, usually from a personal POV. And then in the last few years, maybe the last 5 years, I spent a lot more time writing about Black radical history, still along the subject of political violence. So yeah, that's more or less, yeah, my background. I could roll out the CV, but that's not necessarily interesting.
All right, I'm just pulling up, or attempting to here. Now it's not letting me do it. All right. I was attempting to pull up the cover of your comic, but it's not letting me do it. I don't know what's going on. But Renee, did you have something you wanted to get started with in terms of questions about the book? Otherwise, yeah, go
But
ahead.
you know me, I have, like my page full of notes because you know how I do. But I am curious about just the general, like, Ben, what made you decide to do this book specifically? And was there kind of like, as you went into the creation of the book, was there like a thought process, like an end thought process? Like what was the end goal for you as you were doing the creation? Like, I want readers to walk away from this book with this thing or multiple things, or that, if that question's making sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the genesis of the book comes from a couple different directions. One thing I kept running into when I would be, in the middle of some, street demos that maybe got, a little conflictual, whether it was with the police or fascists or something. There'd be a lot of conversations about, what the right way to protest is, or the right way to sort of build a movement against, fascism or white supremacist violence. And people would evoke, Martin Luther King, stuff like that, or even, I did one comic about this, but during the George Floyd uprising here in Philadelphia, I had a conversation with a kid about like when the right time was to be conflictual, sort of like while while police cruisers were burning all around us. So I think in one motivation was definitely to really just make a case for a kind of tradition that I didn't feel like people were talking about in a full way, and to focus on some people that I think are often like not known, but I think are like pretty significant. Probably the most popular or most widely known person in the book that I write about is Asada Shakur, who who I think is pretty well known. But then when she passed, I noticed that a lot of people just had no idea who she was, or there was a couple like dedication posts on social media that were like R.I.P. to Asada, and then they would post like Angela Davis's picture. um, so that was a big part of it. Initially the book, I sold it to Pantheon Publishing, who ultimately published it before any writing was done. And initially the book was supposed to be just a very straightforward history book. And over the course of several years, the production of the book probably took about 7 years in total. But while researching for the book, I think I came to appreciate just how difficult researching something at this scale is. And I just to be real, I was like, I'm not an academic, you know what I mean? So I think I felt like I needed to figure out what my contribution as someone who's an artist making a piece of work, but also someone with a very particular relationship to applying some of these ideas that I'm writing about. Like, what is my entry point into this subject? So then the book, the frame of the book, stopped being sort of like a book with no particular like narrator or no protagonist in it, and I started working on framing it around a father trying to teach his resistant son his own history, to the end that like wanting him to take up this particular tradition.
Thank you. Jared, I tried to pull the book cover into our like shared drive to see if we could
No, it's not an
that is
issue. I mean, it's not an issue of access. It's an issue of the stream just not letting me put something on screen. Like I have the cover,
interesting.
like, and
Okay.
it's even showing me that it's sharing. It's just not putting it on the screen.
It's just not showing it. Okay. All right. Well,
Mhm.
StreamYard at it again. There we go.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have if you have some general questions about the book also. And I know we're working with like this slight lag, so I'm trying to make sure that I don't overdo it with the
No,
lag.
I mean,
Uh,
feel free to keep going. Uh, and are
okay.
you and I
So
lagging?
I don't know. Listen, this StreamYard seems to be given a lot of difficulty today, so we're gonna roll with it. But I wish we could pull things up because I have notes on like pages in the actual book that I found super just the way that the choices that Ben made in the actual creation and the pulling together of the information that I had thoughts about. And so I
See, now that pulled up. So I don't know.
there we
Maybe we
go.
can
That
pull up the
pulled up.
pages because that's the book. But
So
but
so
the
if you
cover, I
maybe
don't know.
let's is the cover on like when you scroll all the way up, can we see I just want
So I don't. The
I
only
want
reason I don't
folks
want.
to get an understanding of Ben's
Mhm.
stuff. Go ahead. Sorry.
So I'd rather just do it by pulling up one individual page. The only issue is that the way the book loads, it's not, even when you have the PDF downloaded, it takes a while for the images to load for some reason when you scroll. So I'm just trying to. So it's and I don't know why it does that either, but um so I'll get to the cover eventually, but it takes a moment to load.
Okay. So Ben, so thank you for explaining that. Can you talk a little bit about your choices for what you decided because there is, you covered a lot in the book, like a lot. I was like, he got a lot into this book. Can you talk about the choices that you made for which things you were going to specifically like choose to highlight, like, in just, because I did make it through the whole book, and I don't know if you caught like me and my difficulty reading comics, but I did make it through the whole thing because I was really like, damn, he got a lot in. And so can you talk about the choices that you made for which parts of history you decided to make like kind of focus points as you went through the book?
Yeah, I'm relieved to hear you say that I got a lot in. I think I was worried that I had missed things, and it both could be true, right? That there's a lot in there, and I missed things. Um, I think the original idea was basically to highlight moments in which conflict happened with the state, or with racist militias, or in other cases both. I initially was going to focus on like the conflict itself and just be like, this is cool, like we should be into this. And then like obviously I was immediately self-conscious about the ways in which quote unquote violent revolutionaries are framed in culture. So then I felt like it was important to sort of talk about the context of a lot of these stuff, or these incidents, and go a little deeper about the groups, and try to sort of like transport people, because I think one of the framings of revolutionaries is violent, is to make them seem, it's to sort of dehumanize them. And it felt important for me because of my own relationship to, this history, and also just contemporary movements I've been a part of, is that, these are very knowable people to me. Um, so there was a couple considerations. There was one, sort of giving people an idea about how these periods sort of connected to each other, um, and also giving a context to the people themselves so that people could sort of understand, um, at least that there was a lot of sort of interlocking ideas that led people to make the choices that they made. Um, and uh, and a lot of that was guided, both by just things that are obvious, like ways that it felt sort of obvious. Like in the beginning, I write about Robert Charles, who I think of as a bit of like a, maybe like a proto Pan Africanist. Maybe that's not very accurate, but he was invested in immigrating to Liberia. He was someone that spent a lot of his free time, when he wasn't working one of his three jobs, distributing Immigration Society pamphlets, which I don't think at the time he knew was run by white people. And also, he was really into the Voice of Missions, which was a Negro newspaper. Um, and like one night he was harassed by the police and they tried to shoot him, and he shot them first, and he got into a gunfight with 10,000 soldiers, police officers, and racist white farmers. And then from there, it felt, too tempting to not, because this happens in New Orleans, to not write about when Garvey tried to speak in New Orleans, and Queen Mother Moore, as a very young person, and a bunch of the Black New Orleanians came out with guns and threatened the mayor of New Orleans, and who eventually let Garvey speak. So I some of these things just felt like thematically they worked, and they felt like there was a certain logic to how they interlocked with each other, which I know is not necessarily the most scientific way to sort of do it, but it felt like maybe a good way to sort of help people understand who had no entry point into this beforehand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just shout out to Hiram. I should have given Hiram some credit at the start because we did not find you by
Yes.
mistake. It was not
You just don't
random.
read, beloved.
Shout out Hiram. I appreciate the connection. It is indeed Hiram who sent me a text and said, "He has somebody for you that you need to talk to after we did our show on animation, which I think is still only on the Patreon. We probably should move that at some point, Jared. But so Hiram did the initial introduction and we got to have a conversation before the show, which I really appreciated. But shout out Hiram for making this. Hiram's question, which is actually on my list of questions, so we're gonna go ahead and ask it now, is if you can explain how your anarchist politics show up within the book.
Yeah. Yeah, Hiram yells at me about stuff like this. Yeah, so something that I thought would be nice to write about that I found quite a bit when researching this stuff is that there is like a more or less like a strong tradition of like a kind of decentralized culture as it sort of like contributes to Black resistance in the United States. Um, and so there's that, and I wanted to highlight that where it made sense. There's also a lot of critiques of misleadership or authoritarianism. Um, uh, you know, uh, Coming from a lot of the people that I wrote about. So, like an example is, Asada obviously talked a lot about how patriarchy and sort of power tripping contributed to, her alienation when she was involved in the Black Panther Party. Ashanti Alston, who is an anarchist and a former Panther, writes about how he felt like misogyny and also sort of power tripping contributed to making repression easier, in the party. So I felt like there was an opportunity to sort of talk about, what is an anarchist critique, which is, a critique of unjustified hierarchies of power, critiques of, hierarchies enforced through, patriarchy, through bigotry in general. I wanted to be really careful and not just make, an anarchist revisionist history of the radical Black tradition. And so where there were critiques that I thought were meaningful to talk about, that I didn't really see talked about, at least in in graphic form, I wanted to platform where it made sense. It felt tricky because I also didn't want to um, diminish, the contributions of socialist politics, or there's plenty of people who are into politics that I'm not really into. There's plenty of Marxist Leninists that I wasn't into, so I felt like I didn't want people to walk away being like, yes, um, all of this stuff is not, it's not valid, and I should really get into just reading Kwesi Balagoon and Lorenzo Camboa Irving. I think I just tried to, talk about critiques that I thought were meaningful, but wouldn't contribute necessarily to like a kind of nihilism that I sometimes notice when I make other works that are, heavily influenced by like, Black anarchist critique.
I appreciate that. So how how if I give you a page number, Jared, and then like a second to think, could that work, or are we like shit out the left with the?
We'll give it a shot.
All right, so page 25 is one of the pages within the book that really, like, I have like page numbers written down where the way you decided to pull the information together was just so fascinating to me. you know, part of what we've been talking about a lot here, which I can't even tell you how much I appreciate being able to like have access to someone like you to have these conversations. But so page 25 is kind of I guess it's like a composite of various race riots, and I don't know, Jared, how that's going. We're trying to pull that up, but there was a choice that you made in how you pulled this page together, which riots you decided, quote unquote riots, you decided to kind of, no, they were riots, because the whites were going crazy. So when you decided to pull this page together, so I'm curious about making those types of decisions, the way it's drawn, the way the visual is done. Like, this was such a, I mean, it's just the pink bones, like the whole thing. This book is so well done in calling out various things and giving people things to kind of think about. Can you talk about like the actual design aspect of this, and like what, like the decisions that you made in pulling this together in this way for the visual to be what it is on the page? I'm really hoping my questions are making sense, because I was drawn in, and I not like comic books, and I loved getting through this book. So I'm like fascinated by how this all gets pulled together.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, you know, I value people that don't really mess with comic books at all. Like, being engaged with this, especially because the work is pretty long, and I was aiming for, people that don't necessarily engage with comic books, and also people that, which, this doesn't include y'all at all, but there's obviously plenty of people who don't like to read. I was one of those people. So I felt, motivated to try to create something that would be a little more accessible if you're not going to, read all this history and theory. But yeah, the page itself, what's sort of happening before this particular page is a scene in Robert Charles is harassed by the and they try and shoot him, and he shoots them, and then he gets in this running fight. So in one hand, it's a moment of transition, in that he's running to his house, um, and this is maybe an example of me trying to initially help people understand the context in which he would choose to just go ahead and shoot back, and to talk about just the scale um, of white of just white murder, or these are called race riots, like obviously the history of race riots in the United States is, even though they don't want to talk about it like this, is white people massacring non-white people, specifically black people in the case of this book, but also in general. So there was a couple considerations. I want to introduce this sort of idea, this sort of like this visual grammar that runs through the book, where there are these skeletons and they represent, various ancestors, and I use them in sort of different ways. So this is the first time we're seeing that, and that's just a storytelling consideration. Something that I wanted to be really careful of is I didn't want to make something that is very lucrative in my industry, and I think in media in general, and that is just Black misery porn. Like, I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to give readers just a sense of the scale and the impact of it. So, in the page before this, we have like a little Robert Charles sort of Copia County, where he grew up, and I talk about the different ways Black folks were trying to gain political power during Reconstruction, and I talk about the black coats and this and that, and then you turn and there's this page is representing just the scale of violence. So I wanted people to sort of understand that, but I didn't want to drag it out. And throughout the book, I actively avoid trying to depict Black misery. So this is an example of sort of like one of those solutions. And there is, certainly we're seeing it. There's a drawing of someone being lynched, Black people being beaten and arrested and killed. But I tried to keep it at a minimum, just where it felt necessary. But I in no way wanted to make that gratuitous. I wanted to make moments of our triumph, or things like that. I wanted to make that gratuitous, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes total sense. And this actually is also one of my questions, and this is just me wanting to poke into your brain a little bit. The choice of like the fuchsia skeleton, is that just like picking like a color that will stand out, or is there something else that the fuchsia represents? Because that's the color of the skeleton throughout the book. I'm just curious, like, was there a reason for that color, or is it just like you just wanted a color that was going to stand out from the rest of the page?
The fuchsia, I always call it like a coral red. I think the publisher called it pink. I think initially I wanted to have like a bit of a visual nod throughout the book to like Emory Douglas, or some of the like Russian realist sort of like imagery during the Soviet Union. Just because I thought that was like a visual grammar that people would recognize immediately as sort of like political, but politically subversive. I've done limited palettes quite a bit, and I always go for colors that have like a lot of sort of usefulness in terms of visual storytelling. And something you said before was that there's a lot in the book, and I definitely try to pack a lot of things in there. And a lot of time passes very quickly. I think I mapped it out, but every 5 to maybe 10 pages, we jump in time. And something that sort of helps people understand immediately that we're at a different place. This page is an example of that. Is to use like color and contrasts between pages to help the reader understand that a totally different space. And it can be really easy to lose track of like where we are, particularly when it's not like like a long conversation, or like there's a bunch of romance comics, a lot of things like that. We're sort of sitting in scenes for a long time, and you can get away with certain things. But in this book, I needed a lot of visual tools and communicate when time changes or when space changes, or just have like a big punch. Like this page is an example of me trying to create like just a very punchy page. And then this page, I forget what I do, but it's so just very different. There's like a little bit of red as the skeleton walks into a room. So hopefully that answers the question.
No, it definitely does. And I appreciate it. It really, I can't say it enough, y'all. Like when you're encountering something that's not like what you typically read, and I actively like avoid comic books. I thought it was gonna be so hard for me. I really did. I was like, oh boy, this is gonna be a rough one. And I think it's because of the choices that you made, the choices that you made with colors, the choices that you made with how you told the story, the choices that you made with like MLK's speech, right? Which obviously wasn't his speech, but like, like it's the speech he should have made, right? So like those types of things that I, you know, I was so fascinated by the whole thing. And you know, I told my son is 15 and he's very into anime and my like he's into all this stuff, and he was like, I want to read it, ma. Like he wants, you know what I mean? And so I really appreciate it. Jared, do you have a question? Because you know I got my list,
So,
but I want you to jump in. Don't do this.
no, the only, I mean, you've covered a lot of the kinds of questions that I would have wanted to ask more about the broad, choices and, artistically, and then some about the how the politics get worked in. And yeah, while that might not have been the speech King made, it was the speech King lived in his own life at one point. So, in some ways, so you know, I read some of those, he says, you know, but again, that's not why he was assassinated, and his politics had far more radicalized than he's given credit for. So all due respect, but the obviously the big question I have is why why are why the choice of using the mulatto experience to frame how your story would be told. What choice led to that, or how, yeah, what choices led to that choice, or what led to that choice?
Yeah. Well, I should say, because maybe it'll be confusing for people, but there's an alternative version of some of the I have uh, a dream speech in the book, and it's sort of, the idea is that it's it's the I have the dream speech, sort of like from the white gaze. So it's Dr. King sort of making a case for interracial sex, which was I felt nervous about, for obvious reasons, but I think the motivation was mostly for people in my life who I think underestimate sort of the baseness of white objections to Black liberation. And I think when I was reading a bit about you know about Robert F. Williams specifically, and his struggles around trying to get things like swimming pools integrated. At a certain point, I was like, oh, a lot of these people are just have some weird fantasy slash nightmares about uh, Black male sexuality in particular. So anyway, so that's the context for that. Yeah, the mulatto experience. I think once I knew I was going to be a character in the book, I felt like there was going to be certain things that I was just going to have to uh, address more or less. The character of me in the book is not me. It's maybe a version of me that never, and this is something towards the end of the book that is maybe revealed, but it's a version of me that never really found, a comfortable place within, my identity maybe, and certainly never located any sort of like um, political ideas or understanding. Um, so from my perspective, it's something that's an aspect of this character that's used in the beginning as a reason to not be engaged, and then later is a bit of a joke. Um, and I tried not to, I didn't have any particular interest in like, presenting some sort of tragic mulatto narrative, and I don't think that's in the book at all. But I think in some ways it may be, yeah, I didn't want it to distract people, but to be real, I'm going to show up at these events talking about this topic, and people are going to bring it up. So it felt more useful to sort of address it directly than to sort of like ignore the fact of it.
Yeah,
And
no,
also, you know, it's a comic in which, yeah.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you know, it's just like, I think also it's, you know, like my dad is also, you know, the book is also trying to have a conversation about the complications of like uh what am I trying to say? I think that there's parts of the book in which I'm trying to challenge readers' desire to find like one definitive voice about like the Black experience or like radical Black history. And a lot of that I do that in a couple ways, but you know, there's different ways in which like my father in the book is sort of challenged or were meant to sort of wonder about his understanding of himself and his own history. So in that way, it's like it's also all through the book, me and my dad are bantering about contradictions in his life and things that he has to say. And I really like more than creating, you know, a book that's trying to be definitive. I wanted to try and push this tendency people maybe have to just pick up one book and read it and be like, okay, I understand it. I really wanted people to understand that like you have to question the material that you're reading, and seek further information, and also understand that yeah, there's a lot of contradictions in all of this stuff, and we shouldn't just be seeking like you know, some kind of idealized voice. We're gonna have to like find, you know, receive information and act passionately anyway, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And you know, I just admit that as I was reading it, I do apologize for not finishing it yet, but that I just got into a subjective, defensive, I don't know, perspective. Like I just got defensive. That because the book starts with you know with this mulatto dude, you know, and you know, I know a little bit about that, and then it's and he's saying, and it's sort of, I felt it was sort of the cliche of the mixed dude doesn't really want to be involved with his Blackness and needs to be taught a lesson and brought into it, uh, and that this is something special and unique to the mixed race experience, as opposed as though the entire Black community is itself already knowledgeable of the history you recount and already engage deeply in the history you recount in the book, and it's just its mixed offspring that need to be brought back in. And I just think so. I just got defensive around that, and then also I admit also, you know, which I think was important, that I did not have the experience with my father that your character does in the book. So I was just, you know, the whole back and forth and the whole review, you know, the self critique and the engagement and all of that. So I just admit, so I was just curious what led you to that, and now I admit I'm more curious to know more about your personal life. Not that this has to happen here, but I just another admission. So, uh, um, and yeah, so like often is the case for our more melanated Haitian millennials, my mulatto sensibilities got ruffled a little bit, you know. So I just, you know, but I don't have a problem admitting it and confronting it. But I'm happy to have you respond and to say anything else more about any of that, or for us to move on. But yeah, I just, you know, and the book does start with that, so it's like right there, you know, right out the gate, and you know, with that, it is that tinge of the tragic, and then it's brought into something I think far more important. So I appreciate that you did that. It doesn't stay. It's not about the tragedy, but I admit, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's it. Um, but Renee, if
Yeah,
Ben doesn't have any, you know, but I don't know where we are with the delay. But I'm happy to move on.
yeah. I don't want to like descend into a dusty, you know, discourse about how the internet talks about biraciality versus, how I understood it growing up. Dusty, because I am in my 40s, but I admit that I was conscious of and worried about people bouncing off of that for various reasons early on in the book, and the way that the two characters interact. I think when you're writing something, obviously you have to be true to yourself to a degree, and me and my dad have a complicated relationship, but one that includes him maybe finding my disrespect entertaining. Um, but yeah, I think for me, the biracial stuff was, I think, less important than showing a character who was actively antagonistic. And I feel like I don't think that that's exclusive to biracial people at all. I mean, in my own personal history, I think I probably have a longer history of overcompensating around that than being disaffected. But I think it's certainly, yeah, it's certainly true that yeah, maybe some people might feel like this is a book exclusively for a disaffected biracial, but I certainly hope not.
No,
So
right on, right on. Yeah,
I'll just pop
go
in
ahead,
to
Renee.
say
Yeah.
that as someone who is not a disaffected biracial, I did not I did not take that from the book at all. So, Jared, did you have another one? Another question?
No, no, we can get you. We can go back to. Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, no, go ahead, go ahead.
All good. So one of the things that, and I assume this was intentional, but you did a really good job of kind of tethering out information about organizing as a general works for like a general thought process as you were going through the book. There were various organizations that you talked about. You talked about the UNIA, you talked about the Black Panthers, you talked about Move, like actual organizing concepts and people within organizing spaces and how those things all work together. I'm curious, what is it about the organizing piece that you wanted readers to take away from it? Was it more of a understanding of how organizing worked within these spaces, or was there something that you want readers to take away from the book about how to organize and how to be a part of the organization that you were hoping people would tether out from the reading?
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate the question. I think something that that informs the way that I think about organizations is rooted in my own personal relationship to practicing, anarchism, like in the field of like, organized resistance. I've both been part of like decentralized little milieus of doing things. And also, I got really political in New Orleans in the sort of maybe like later aughts, and was part of, sort of pan political anti-gentrification things. So I think that I've been fortunate that I've been an anarchist the whole time, but have engaged with it, I think, in all the possible ways one can engage with anarchism. Um, Something that was definitely motivating when making the book was one to sort of really establish like what a revolutionary actually is. I think some frustration, personal frustration that I have, I have had probably since the initial sort of public sort of rise of the second BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, as opposed to the Black Liberation Movement, was this sort of misunderstanding that that, you know, like there's a difference between the people I write in the book, you know, largely the people I write about in the book, and sort of like professional activists, you know, very charismatic executive directors. And, you know, one can appreciate these people, but I felt like there was this way that people would sort of co-opt the words and history and tradition of people like Asada and be like, that's me now. And it's like, well, it's not, you know. And sort of within
And
that,
that
I
happened.
think that, yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think I also wanted people to sort of understand uh what dynamics have already sort of failed us, and hopefully look out for those as they um pop up now. You know what I mean? Like, I think I get in these conversations sort of around this book, but in general people will be like, well, you know, why don't we have the Panthers now, or like what really happened, this and that. And I felt like I tried to sort of sketch out the arc of, you know, how things arrive, how people get together, and ways in which people abuse power, take advantage of political moments to, yeah, take advantage of people. So, you know, I certainly featured groups that I like, you know what I mean, that contained a lot of dynamics that I didn't like, and I also talk about groups that I am probably only entirely critical of, but tried to even write about those, the people involved in those with humanity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so you mentioned this briefly, and it's also on my list of notes. Is you did a really good job of highlighting Black misleadership in within the historical context, like showing people who, you know, I guess in the books and in the story, the current storytelling are shown highlighted as, like, you know, these great leaders, but you kind of nitpick, you're not nitpick, but you pick at these these characters in a really good way to show like why they're problematic, why they were problematic then, and why people of that nature continue to be problematic. Can you talk a little bit about, like, your choices in who you highlighted as Blackness leadership? And we don't, you know, I have my little like mini list. I don't know if you want to talk about anybody specific, but why you made that choice, because I think it's something that is rarely identified in, you know, in these written spaces, that I'm really glad you took the time to identify.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would be definitely interested in the list of people. You know, broadly, yeah, I tried to. I think, as I said before, just underline critiques that already existed, and that had already been written. But I think, as you said, are often put to the side or ignored. I think for reasons that are understandable, and also reasons that are reprehensible. Like, it is true that we are, you know, colonized people. You know, we're a bit surrounded, and our faults are often used to delegitimize, you know, our fight for liberation and independence. So it felt complicated to highlight these things, to maybe have, you know, I guess the way I've been talking about it, an inside conversation a bit outside. But I thought that something that I think is tough is that, you know, now we have, you know, we'll have instances where people will call out political leaders, like, you know, on Twitter or whatever. And I think sometimes these conversations can be, or the way that people sort of talk about the faults of people is often unproductive, and I often feel like we don't ultimately like learn from them necessarily. We just sort of reveal people to be deeply imperfect, and then we go out searching for perfect people. Um, and something that I think a lot about, or that was one of my like sources that informs my way of thinking about this is Kwesi Balagoon in I think towards the back of his book, A Soldier's Story, talks about what he looks for or what he looked for in comrades. You know what I mean? And that included people that, you know, couldn't be trusted for, you know, various reasons. But one of the things he pointed out is like, you can't trust a dude that's really rah-rah about politics, you know, when he's talking to people. You know what I mean? Like, that's actually not what you're looking for, is someone who over prioritizes, you know, their sort of like, and, you know, he wouldn't have used this term, but sort of their personal brand, you know what I mean? Or overemphasizes like the combat over other things. So yeah, I think, you know, at the end of the, you know, finishing the book, there's some people that I think maybe I was overly harsh with, even though my characterization of them was based off of a lot of research. The one I'm maybe most feeling guilty about is the way I characterized Amari Obadelli, who I think comes off as a bit obnoxious in the book. But the big swing that I took, that I really stand by, that no one has criticized me for yet, is the way that I wrote about Move. You know, John Africa isn't it very long, but I think, you know, we've learned a lot about that organization in the last couple of years, and it felt really important for me to use it as a sort of like a test case for the ways that people can be sort of taken advantage of, and people can use radical language to manipulate people and create a lot of abuse.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And funny enough, I actually have like a little note about Mike Africa. So you're hitting all the points that I have here. But I'll try to remember to send you my list, because I was like, he's sneaky with this. Like, you needled some of this in a really good way, and it was very appreciated, because I also am very, very sick of the Blackness leadership class and people who are just getting on my damn nerves. But so so I'm curious also, you know, so I have my list of things. So like UNIA, you talked a lot about, not a lot, but one of the sections was specific to the racism that was in place for Black veterans after returning from you know, obviously being in war overseas. And I'm right now, I have like a note on it, and I'm trying to remember if you talked about like some of the federal policies. I don't think you did. Like the federal policies that were in place that were supposed to be for veterans but didn't actually apply to any of the Black ones. But I am curious about if there was anything within that time, like was it specifically about the self-defense? Because, you know, it was one of those areas where you know, he was fighting and there was the shootout and all those things. But the question I'm actually trying to get to is whether or not there was anything else about being a Black veteran at that time, returning from war and realizing that you know, you don't have access to any of the things that you're supposed to have access to. Was there anything, like, was any of that part of what you wanted people to pull out? Because I feel like I didn't pull that much out of it, but I didn't know if it was just me missing it in reading the comic or what.
Yeah, I learned, you know, I have to admit, I learned a lot about the realities of Black soldiers during World War II, and then, you know, when they got out of it, while researching the book in general, but about Robert F. Williams in particular, you know, who was in the military, and, you know, his generation, particularly, you know, in the South. You know, my impression is we can really thank that generation for introducing a lot of really inspiring energy into the you know, the civil rights movement. And I think that I could have really filled an entire book about the realities of Black veterans, and like the ways that they fought, butted up against and fought segregation in the military even before they got out. I tried, you know, I think this is an instance where I tried to sort of give people breadcrumbs, but try to really focus on the instances of self-defense within the United States. So I wanted to write about, when I was beginning the chapter, I wanted to write about his conflict with the Klan, which ends up getting sort of talked about specifically in this sort of mock 1950s propaganda video in the beginning of the chapter. So I wanted to write about that, and also I wanted to write about his relationship with Black women within Monroe, which felt like just a very important point about like how communities historically do sort of function when resisting white supremacy. And I don't think that I had heard or read enough about that. And certainly when people are sharing things about Robert F. Williams on social media, people don't really talk about the support around him and the fact that he was in many ways, he himself is, he's an intellect and a very inspiring person. But I think a lot of what he was able to do was because of the community around him. And that felt important to talk about. So that was an instance where I needed to make a choice about like what I went deep into, you know what I mean? And I chose to sort of reference the realities of Black veterans, but certainly not in a very deep way, you know what I mean? And if I had maybe another 50 pages, I probably would have written more about that.
No, that's fair. You mentioned the movie, and I didn't make a note of it, but I did while I was reading it. I was trying to, was that just so one of the chapters in the book, as Ben just mentioned, starts with him like sitting in the theater and watching a movie. And I wasn't sure if that was a reference to a specific movie or if it was something, because I was thinking of I'm gonna blank on the name of it. The movie about the Klan that was shown in the White House. Like this,
Birth of a Nation.
Essential, like a terror. Yes, Birth of a Nation. And I didn't know if that's kind of what you were pulling from, or if it was some other movie. And I wasn't going to ask the question; it was just something that I thought. But since you talked about it, I'll go ahead and ask. If there or if it was more like kind of a montage to show how like movies and media at that time were really part of the propaganda machine.
Yeah, I was referencing, and I don't remember the name of the company, but there was there's a bunch of Disney characters that were used for propaganda videos for the military, but then broadly there's a ton of cartoons that were used for propaganda against all sorts of things, or to support capitalism, very very literally. There's different points in the book where I recreate different kinds of media that people would be engaging with to receive information about the world. So like in the Robert Charles section, at one point we sort of turned the page and we're inside a Negro newspaper, and I use that time to talk about the immigration societies. In some shade during the move chapter, there's a point in which we're watching a reporter, in that case is my dad, talking about move after the bombing. And even later in the book, there's a point where we're just looking at a cell phone screen. So it's an example of me just trying to sort of recreate media at these different points, that in a way that I hope feels immersive, but also similar to the Dr. King speech. There's these times when I'm trying to, in my case, I'm thinking of like members of my family who I think often uh, don't don't necessarily I don't necessarily feel like they always understand the way that we're viewed. And sometimes it's like, they don't maybe haven't interacted maybe with like white people or like a lot of right-wing white media to necessarily really understand. Um, and it could be something else, maybe kind of optimism. But I think that was an instance in which I wanted to just really clarify like what the white gaze for this period was, because it contrasts so starkly, right, with our understanding of it, and then the understanding of those people. Like it's actually like pretty uncomplicated. I think there's a degree in which they're like, oh, so and so is, and more recently it's like, oh, so and so McNamee is like a communist or whatever. And I think for the longest time, personally, I thought like, well, surely they don't actually literally think he's a communist. Like this is just, some kind of demonization. And yeah, I think it was a way to just sort of like recreate maybe the white gaze for readers. I think, hearing some of the feedback of the book after, because of course, many white people are going to read this book. It's a comic book. And the industry, the market for comic books is still, majority white. And I think some people have sort of taken those moments as like, me trying to tell white people about how bad they are, but that's really not like what the function of those chapters are.
Thank you. And since you just mentioned that, and I'm going to skip to my last question and then work my way backwards. And it's only because you literally just said what you said. I'm curious how much of this idea of your audience being a lot of white non-black folks played in how you put the book together. Did you decide like fuck them, I don't really care, like if they take anything from this that might be slightly offensive, or did you write with the idea that, I don't even know if there's really a way to put it, but did they factor at all? Did the fact that, comic books are a majority like non-black space, did that factor in how you pulled the book together and the things that you chose, or did you just decide like, I'm not going to let that play a role in this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, some background on some of my earlier work, maybe starting in 2016. I initially made this book called Your Black Friend that was a bit of a send up of, Black media for white people. It was largely about a kind of Black alienation that was for other Black people, but I think mostly because of the title, um, uh, uh, I would say a lot of white people thought that it was literally like an instruction manual for how to be a good ally, and that was like an important lesson, um, and a bit complicated. I got a lot of work afterwards because of the popularity of that book, but it was a bit humiliating for me as a writer for a lot of people to not understand the joke. Um, so, this is, me knowing that this book was probably going to be, um, probably more or less as popular, maybe, or as widely read as that much smaller book. I felt like I needed to make a decision one way or the other. I had for years before that just decided to ignore the fact that white people were going to read it, because I didn't really have anything I wanted to say to them specifically, and I wanted to write for Black people about our stuff. And I felt like I didn't want to translate things or, this or that. I just wanted to talk about things directly. So that being said, the Black Arms, this book was written for Black people, and I just in writing it, I just decided that I wasn't going to try to think about the fact that white people are going to read it or like offer up anything. You know what I mean? Um, it's not like, they read all sorts of manga and stuff that's not made for them. You know what I mean? So I'm sure they'll get something out of it, but I'm not, was not and am not particularly concerned with trying to make things coherent for them, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And thank you for indulging that question. I wasn't actually sure if I was going to ask it. it was it was at the end of the list, but obviously, you want. I felt like it was a welcome question, so we decided to just go with it. Um, so
Absolutely.
there's an app that focuses on New Africa and UNIA, and so I'm curious. I'm a little curious about like what made you decide to pull that in. If it was because there's such, obviously this focus on self-defense and kind of creating our own and teaching ourselves how to function within this larger society, this larger colonized society. But as an anarchist, I thought it was a curious like pathway, and so I'm wondering about that choice and if there's anything in particular about Black nationalism, not specifically New Africa. I mean, although I guess you are specific about it. So I'm trying not to get you in trouble. I don't want you to say anything that's gonna get you like emails and people yelling at you. But is there anything you want to talk about like with regard to Black nationalism, whether it's specific or not to the New Africa, um, um, I guess proposition. I don't know how I really want to phase that. Um, that you wanted that you want people to kind of pull from this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm making content. I've been making content on the internet for maybe almost 20 years. So I wouldn't be much of an anarchist if I was afraid of, conflict or people yelling at me. I honestly, for the things I get yelled at on the internet, I would sort of welcome people who are angry about my takes about Black nationalism. Um, broadly, I think, Black anarchists, anarchatas are looking at, uh, you know, traditions around Black nationalism and the RNA, specifically among others, to sort of think about like what, or try to locate, like what is Black anarchism? You know what I mean? So it is certainly an interest of mine, and I think a personal contradiction is that I'm probably more of a Black nationalist, broadly speaking, than maybe other anarchists might be. So at the very least, have a deep sympathy for this aspiration to have a place of our own in which we can make our own, autonomous decisions. I think my initial interest in this idea was through Kwesi Balagoon, who talked about concepts of the anti-state, maybe a bit of a maroon society idea. Um, when it comes to wanting to write about Black armed self-defense, I wrote about these groups because I thought they were important, and also you just have to, right? You know what I mean? Like the RNA specifically, according to Mari, had a hand in the '67 rebellion, which I think I referenced in the comic. They had a standing, however you want to say it, a standing army. They had this for a little bit, sort of this. I don't know what you would call it, but sort of this idea that each citizen would go through a certain amount of gun training, so they just felt like a necessary group to sort of like talk about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I've triggered a question in the chat that I think is probably worth asking right now. Alex asks, I wonder if Ben has ever watched the show Woke on Hulu about a Black cartoonist who is apolitical until he has an encounter with the police.
I actually
Yeah,
saw it when
yeah.
it came out. Yeah. What did you think of it? Yeah.
Well, I should say that Keith Knight is my friend, and I'm proud of him for I think it went for 2 seasons. Um, I didn't, and so therefore I feel like I need to be careful to maintain my positive relationship with him. I did not recognize myself in that show, and had a bit of a hard time relating to that particular sort of like arc of I don't even know if you would call it radicalization that the character went through. Um, yeah, I know that's probably an unsatisfying response.
Look, don't make no enemies up on here. Jared, did you want to add something? You muted.
No, I think that was a charitable response, and I don't remember it enough. The only thing I just remember was the vibe of being dissatisfied with the politics of the series. But I think I was initially more hopeful, which is itself a problem. But yeah, I think that's fine. We don't need to get Ben to burn any bridges or upset anything. So yeah, especially since I don't remember. It's been too long. Yeah. No, and Dre, I appreciate the invitation to hate, and I'm always looking for one and happy to accept one, but I just don't remember it well enough, and uh, no need for my hate to get to upset any friendships and relationships. But again, I just don't remember it. Other than that, I think what Ben said is probably a good way of putting it. I didn't see myself something to that extent. I didn't recognize my own experience in that. Yeah.
Interesting. I've never even heard of that show, so I guess.
Yeah. What's his
now I'm
name?
like, go find it.
The lead is. He had he kind of blew up for a minute relatively. I think he got some roles. I'm seeing his face. I don't remember his name, but I just remember there was a moment. There was like some scene. One slight memory I have is like there was a scene of some interaction in a store, and I remember noting that it was something about the diaspora, and I was disappointed about the Pan African exchange. But anyway, yeah. But if you maybe watch at least one episode, and maybe it's worth that we all revisit it and have a discussion about it.
Interesting.
I think the tough thing is that we don't get too many chances, as Black creators and watchers of this media, you know what I mean, to have a TV show. So maybe like, what Dr. Ball was saying, it's like I had a lot of high hopes. I had read Keith Knight's comics for a long time, and as I said, he's a friend of mine. So he's part of a community of Black cartoonists, of which there is not a huge one, and he is certainly much more successful than we're usually allowed to be. But I think the tough thing always when it comes to political content made by people who are professional artists and not necessarily really at all like tapped into like a political milieu, you get these things that are you get storylines and stuff that are sort of based off of what's sort of emotionally expedient, or maybe even like funny to the creator, but are not necessarily trying to be responsible to sort of larger concepts of like movements and stuff. I think I remember feeling complicated about how like political people were depicted, and felt like it taps into this thing that I'm always just sort of annoyed about characterizations of the left in the United States, where it's like hapless and like we're prefer to like we like to sort of argue about like these small differences over like getting things done, and I don't find that to be accurate or all that constructive. But end of the day, it's a Hulu show, and Keith, don't be mad at me. I'll see you at the next thing.
That first of all, we appreciate that the assumption is he will see this. So we appreciate the assumption. And after that but I agree also that in general, that's a major issue that I share with you, that the way the left is constantly demeaned. And I mean, this is going back to the days of even blaxploitation, where it's just lampooned. The idea of Black revolution and liberation is turned into a caricature. So yeah, I appreciate that an interest in defending the image of the struggler. Yeah, so right on. Uh,
So thank you, and I guess maybe we can check in with Ntume and see if he's seen this series. Might be Kichi, might be worth, maybe not the whole series, but we could talk about it a little bit. So you had mentioned, Ben, um, being surprised after Asada's passing, how few people were actually tapped in and understanding who Asada was and her story. And I reread her autobiography like 2 or 3 weeks before she passed, and so when she passed, she was very like fresh in my mind because I had just decided, like, and it was very random, my decision to reread it. I don't really have a reason why I decided to. I just did. And so the highlighting of Asada and her story and the ways you told her story, I thought was very well done. And I'm curious if you went into the book knowing that Asada and her story was going to be part of what you were going to write, or if you had, I maybe like a debate on, you know, is there someone else that you were thinking about writing about? Were there other, kind of black female figures in our historical reference, that were kind of, for lack of a better words, like in the running to also be a part of the storyline? But I'm curious about why Asada, and if there was anyone else that you I mean, not that there aren't other Black women within the book. People don't get crazy, but just I'm just curious about that specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hesitant to write about Asada in the book because I wanted to write about lesser known people. And, from my perspective, Asada, um, at least her name and sort of like the general facts about her life, I thought were sort of just like pretty in the culture, certainly in comparison to Asafia Bakari, who I think I thought about writing about, who maybe in some ways would have made more sense, given, I write about Sanika Shakur later and talk about, prisoners of war. Um, but, I committed kind of early on to writing about Asada. Um, I thought that, she wrote about, concerns, experiences, critiques of the party that I thought would be really useful to, towards the thesis of the book. And I wanted to, at least mention the BLA, which I was really happy to see in the few times, people like Mark Lamont Hill made a point to, say that she was both in the Panthers and in BLA. I don't feel like the BLA is talked about nearly as much, for reasons that are probably obvious. But I think that it's a really important formation. Something that I thought a lot about when I read her book again in preparation for writing the book, and then engaged with the sort of other media when researching it, was this sort of game of telephone that was happening between sort of her and the state, and her supporters, or just like the culture around her, right? I think, and I tried to sort of recreate that in the book. Her chapter is sort of in the middle of the chapter around the RNA, and her story is told to me in parts by other people, so not her, most of the book is my dad like narrating the lives of people, and it's drawn in my drawing style. But most of Sada's chapter is drawn in several different drawing styles, and that I did that to reveal a bit that maybe the whole book is just one perspective, right? Which maybe goes without saying because it's me writing it. But I just it's one of the different ways I wanted to sort of be in dialogue about credibility and point of view when it comes to talking about these things. And so anyway, so that aside, something that I just thought was really interesting that Sada talks about in her book, she's basically like, the feds made me responsible for any bank robbery that included a Black woman. They put all this stuff on me. And I thought it was interesting because this is not exclusive to her, but something I think is interesting is that like this vision of her as being like this militant that's robbing banks all the time and shooting cops. I think that's a great story. You know what I mean? I have no problem with that, that image of her. I understand that that's like a depiction of her that's being weaponized, but I, in fact, I love a revolutionary of this description. But I also respect that, she was like, I never shot a cop. I didn't do all this. And I was being repressed for my political organizing. So I think that's part of like, broadly just such a complication when it comes to, learning about and sort of supporting these people is that we're often getting, or it's often really difficult to even get a sense of like what actually happened, even around the things that like me being, I guess a bit bloodthirsty as a political person really into, right? So that chapter is really sort of like playing with that, and also in the different ways that the versions of these figures that we get from people can often be really dictated by this sort of specific motivation for us to walk away with something. So it's Amari is chastising people for not talking about all the different sort of attacks Asada was allegedly a part of, while someone else is maybe talking about her disappointment when engaging with the contemporary UNIA, things like that.
Thank you. And then I have one more like topical question, like something you talked about in the book, and then just like a more general thing. So I don't have that much left, Jared, if you had anything else on your list that you wanted to talk about. But I know you're, if I remember correctly, in or about Philadelphia now. And I don't think we ever talked about like where you grew up, if you grew up in Philly or outside of Philly. I just don't remember if we had that conversation. But you give a chapter to the MOVE, like the movement itself, which for folks who are unaware was they were trying to live their own lives. It was a group of families, and the city of Philadelphia decided to drop a bomb from a helicopter on the entire neighborhood. And so I was glad to see MOVE as part of the book, and I'm curious if that was in part chosen because of your connection to Philadelphia, or if there was some other reason for it. And the way you depict MOVE itself, I think, was in part trying to show like what, and you talk about this, like, what the white gaze was. So I think maybe that played a role in some of the choices that you made with regard to like how MOVE is depicted within the chapter. But I'm curious about like, the connection to Philadelphia, if that was anything specific, and just the general decision to include MOVE itself as part of the book.
Yeah. Well, I'm not from Philadelphia. I'm from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which I joke that there's only been 2 Black people from Great Barrington, myself and Du Bois, which is not true. There's other Black people there. But So I moved to Philadelphia maybe 9 or 10 years ago. And when I came here, I think I knew Move only to the degree that I knew about the bombing in the early '80s. Um, and I think that I felt like I wanted to learn more about them because I would go to demonstrations, and Pam Africa would show up with a Pan African flag, and people love Pam Africa, and I was like, oh, I should maybe know about more about her, and more about Move in general, which is, however you want to think about it, Move is still around. So uh, I had made a short comic about Move a number of years ago, that was trying to describe what their politics were. And it really focused on John Africa, where he came from, some guesses about how his ideas developed. All that stuff is like a bit of a black box, in my opinion, and maybe this will result in a bunch of emails. But Move is not um, a political organization so much that it is like a religious group. They're often described as a cult. I think, if I'm honest, I probably would also describe them that way. And even though that, like, cult is often used as like an insult, I think it is an accurate description of them. Um, and it's something that it's a religious group that rose up. I talk about this in the book, and this is my general feeling. It was able to develop because there was this enormous absence. In interviews with some Move people, they talk about like, oh, I was too young to be a part of the civil rights movement, or like to be in the Panthers, and there was at least one former Panther that joined Move, that felt sort of burned out by the Panthers, and so they joined Move. So I think a lot of people were really searching for something when they entered Move in these different ways, um, and and that's fine. I think something that initially felt really complicated to me, or what sort of raised flags when wanting to sort of study Move, is the way that they talked about like the strategy of John Africa and the shape of Move itself. Something I don't really talk about in this book, but I talked about in the comic I made before a couple of years ago, was that, like, there's all these aspects of Move that were clearly inspired by, the Panthers specifically. But, to most of uh, to most of the Move people, they'll describe these as, ideas and strategies that are unique to John Africa, and that feels a bit irresponsible. And in my experience, like a way that political leaders will try to um, sort of contain people by sort of describing a politics that comes from a tradition, but claim it's something unique to them, and that feels troublesome. Um, the way that I approached the chapter in the book about Move was to um, yeah, I guess, illustrate aspects of things that did happen, dynamics that I thought were um, troubling, but ultimately, and I think this is the tough thing, right? When trying to critique um, uh, movements, our movements or our communities. The reality is like the organized violence of sort of directed at us often makes that stuff moot, and it makes it even harder to sort of talk about, because at the end of the day, in the comic that I try to recreate more or less like the hours before Move was bombed. There's all these things that happen inside the house, all these power dynamics and struggles, and people, as you said, just trying to live their life, both good and bad, and ultimately all these people are killed. And it's yeah. I don't know how to put a period on this series of thoughts, but that's overall was my approach to the book.
Gotcha. And I lied. I forgot that there was one more thing, but I've hesitated to doing pull up pages thing because it's been so tricky with pulling up pages. But um, on page 179, and I don't know that there's actually a question, but this was another part of the book that kind of, it hit me enough that I think it's worth pulling the page up and just kind of letting people quasi experience this, along with me. But you end up towards the end of the book, you really talk more about like organizing in prison and prison as like a death sentence, and all the other things that come with being incarcerated in this country, and the visuals that you use to get people to understand political prisoners and who has died in prison, and it starts on that page and it kind of goes on for a few pages where you lay these things out. And I just thought it was, I don't want to say beautiful, that's such a bad word for it, but it's such a moving interpretation of this prison system and how it incarcerates some of our more brilliant minds, and the use of prison as a death sentence, whether it's meant to be a death sentence or not. But I really appreciated the choices that you made here with back to the pink skeletons and things like that. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add about political prisons in general, or making this presentation about like how this comes up with organizing. But I'll leave that there for you to do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this was really an important section when answering the question, what happened, right? Where did the Panthers go? Where did the revolutionaries? Because I also include in several pages, which is essentially Sinika Shakur and my dad walking down a prison here. And I really wanted to give people, this is zoomed in, but I wanted, these are full pages of cells. And I have, all these different people, these revolutionaries. Many of them are in the book, are featured in the book. They're all in these prison cells. They're, the amount of time they were in solitary confinement specifically, but also just in prison in general. In the chapter, when I write about Sinika Shakur, who maybe is more widely known as Monster Cody, he was an LA Crip. He was in the A-Trays, and he was in prison several times, but he was radicalized in prison. And a part of his radicalization, which I don't talk about in the book all that much, but part of his radicalization was tapping in with with this BLA press and Sundiata specifically, I believe. And he was deeply inspired by that political tradition, and came out of prison, a Pan-Africanist, a Black nationalist. But he talks about in his book, and I talk about in my book too, sort of his path, right? He initially meets an imam who challenges his veneration of street politics. He joins a Crip organization that sort of envisions itself as like a Maoist formation. So he talks about all that stuff and the realities of like both his education while in prison, but also just what prison does to people. And then also like he talks about something that I really want to make really clear, that is, something that many people have written about, just the way in which prison is specifically constructed to repress the Black population. An individual like Panthers, Black political leaders, but something that I just thought a lot about with COINTELPRO is, that I don't necessarily hear about too much, is just that whole communities were being watched. they were understanding, and Sonika talks about it in the comic, that they're seeing every Black birth as a political birth, because any individual Black person be the next Malcolm, the next, and that it became necessary to de-radicalize, to impede the Black population's ability to self-actualize itself as much as possible. So he also talks about things that maybe some people think are conspiracy theories that I that I into, is just, you know, the role of crack in the neighborhood and heroin before that. So yeah, I these are, you know, I rarely do like full page spreads, and this chapter has, I believe, 3 or 4 full page spreads of all the different people at the time of the book who were in prison, and then it talks a little bit about the Jericho movement and Safi Bakari sort of at the end. Yeah.
There is a quick question in the chat. Franny Fran wants to know, in this chapter and on the page, are you actually quoting political prisoners, or is this just additional context that you're providing?
Oh no, it's additional context. Yeah, I don't think that any specific quotes.
That was actually what I thought, but I just didn't want to answer.
Quotes in the book, but yeah.
I wanted you to answer me. So I was like, that was the answer I thought, but just wanted to make sure. And then, so my final question, and you know, we're close to wrapping anyway, so I guess my timing is pretty good, is you know, this intersection of you being a Black cartoonist, an anarchist, not being apolitical, you know, all of those things. I'm curious, like, your life as a cartoonist, if there's anything that you can, you know, I don't know, just thoughts about that intersection. When we had our Zoom call, I really, you know, I was very much fascinated by like your general story of this, like, kind of working as a cartoonist with all of, you know, your political leanings, we'll call it. And you know, I don't know if I'm really asking a good question here, but I really am just curious about that intersection and how life is for you as a Black cartoonist with the ideologies that you hold. Like, do you find this to be a really, really difficult space to live in? You know, I assume that you've kind of found some ways. You said there was like community, even though it's not a large community. I was curious about, like, you know, like you surviving like in these multiple spaces.
Yeah, no, I appreciate I talk about that. And you know, maybe I could talk about it for a long time. You know, when I was starting out, I went to school in Savannah, Georgia. I went to art school, and then I moved to New Orleans, where I got connected with a pretty big anarchist community there. And there's a lot of focus on, you know, squatting and you know, outside of society in that way, that I found, you know, pretty useful. It's also not an incredibly Black space, and me and a couple of the other Black anarchists that were sort of around that community often, you know, sort of like struggled with that. But I learned a lot about squatting, a lot of about, you know, what people would maybe call expropriation, and I lived incredibly cheaply, and I got to engage with a lot of political praxis on a daily basis. And a lot of when I started doing nonfiction comics, the motivation was more to talk about larger ideas and also just personal lessons around those things. And that was something that I was just used to within the anarchist community. Was not, you know, like talking about politics was not so much wrapped up in like who was right necessarily, like, you know, who was pure or whatever, but it was purely practical. And comics were for a long time, I think before I started getting work doing nonfiction comics specifically, was just a thing that I like to do, that I aspired to, make a career. I was probably the only friend group who was all that invested in a career. And I certainly, even now, probably have a certain amount of self-consciousness about that. But comic, no, it's particularly indie comics, which is the part of the world I got into. It is super white, but it is like, I did find really quickly other feminists. There's even way more than there used to be. There was a time when, if you knew a Black cartoonist, you could guarantee that they knew everybody you knew. So now when I go to comic festivals, I'll see Black people and they don't even say what's up, and I had to learn to know some type of way about that. But yeah, I definitely I feel very, very fortunate that I was able to build a niche like pretty easily, writing comics that that I wanted to. I sort of broke in more or less for the nib.com, which is now a different local platform. I worked for them for many years, making just very explicitly, usually like anarchist comics about legalism or street violence and stuff like that. I was published my by Silver Sprocket in San Francisco, which is I think a pretty more or less openly left-leaning comics publisher. And they certainly had no problems with the thing that I wanted to publish. So I am incredibly to make, for the most part, exactly the kind of comics that I make. It does make it really difficult when younger people are like, well, how can I break in like you? I have to, it's probably impossible to do it exactly like me, because it's such a specific way then. And there's still not a lot of us, I think, and this is not an answer to your question specifically, but I think the fact that I think that my work, the subject of my work doesn't always appeal to the people that like to read comics, particularly indie comics. But, I read, among other, all the same stuff as them. You know what I mean? I think that my visual approach has always been like very, very polished, but also like references, the Daniel Klauses and the, Seth Tabachman, he's a political cartoonist too. I think this book is in a lot of ways like easily understandable if you read Moz, which, a lot of love comics hold that up as part of the comics canon. So I think that's also too, that I kind of came out of the box, very polished, and also, I visually reference a lot of comics that people already like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And sorry for keeping you a little long, but this was fascinating.
Oh, no problem.
And I, shout out, Samantha wasn't able to join us today. She was, she had been invited, and I'm really excited for when she has time to kind of go back and watch this. So we can, so she can dig into it a little bit. I am definitely planning on staying in touch, because I absolutely plan to pick your brain as we move forward with this idea of revolutionary animation and how we can utilize, like cartoons and graphics and all these things in my consistent pursuit to like break propaganda and to give people things to think about. And this book, if anything, it definitely gives people things to think about. And so I appreciate everything that you did in. I 100,000% appreciate the list of books at the end. That is also like, versus, I love that you chose to, and I don't know if this is typical in a comic book, that you would animate the list of books versus it just being a typed list, but like the actual animated like news, like the sheet of paper with the list of books. I was like, well, this is dope. I love this. but that you gave people that list of resources. I think too often when people provide information as you provided them, especially in such a different way, using cartooning in this way, that you provided books for people to follow up. And now that you explained at the beginning that you really wanted people to kind of engage in this idea that you don't just read one thing, right? Like you read multiple things and you circle around and you try and find as many resources as possible. So it makes a lot of sense that the book would end the way it did, with the long list of books for people to follow up and read. But I really appreciated that. And I appreciated this work, and thank you for sharing and allowing us to read it. I'm probably going to purchase a copy for my son so that he has it. And I definitely plan to circle back. Before we close out, if you want to tell folks like how to find you, how to follow you, where else to find your works, what other things, if there's anything you can share that you're working on. And then Jared, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add before we wrap for the day.
No, I think this has been great. And I hope people follow the link in the show description and learn more about how to get the work and support the work. And yeah, it's been great.
Word, yeah. Well, I really appreciate y'all having me. Oh, sorry, my fault.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna say I certainly apologize for the delay if that's on me. Easily could be. But yeah, I was very excited to come up on here with y'all and talk. Yeah, I really excited, and I appreciate y'all's time. Let me think. I think yeah, like in terms of the notes in the back, I felt sort of complicated to figure out like how to solve giving people points of reference. But yeah, really, I just wanted people to check my work and get excited about reading more. But yeah, okay. So how can you find me? I am I'm probably the most active on Instagram, and that's an easy way to get information on my Patreon and find my online store. You can easily find me just looking for Ben Passmore, but also you can my IG name is Dayglow Alehole, which I refuse to explain, but it's spelled DAYGLOAYHOLE on Instagram. .com. I also, my Patreon is the same, and I do monthly votes on topics for comics. So if you want to tell me what to make next when I do monthly comics, you can go on there. You can also subscribe for free or as little as $1. And I'm on Blue Sky at Ben Passmore. That's an easy one. But yeah, thanks.
Can we
so
also
much
get you for
me
work for hire on that as well?
You can contact me in any way if you want to work with me. You pick your poison with that one.
Okay. All right, everybody, big salute. Please make sure you've liked, shared, subscribed, support the Patreon, make sure the bell is rung, and the links in the show description to find out more about the PACA event later today and about our guest, Ben Passmore, and this great conversation. And as always, peace to our host, Renee, our guest, Ben, our previous guest, Johannes, and PACA, all of you in the Undefeated chat, all of those who will see and hear this later, but only if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And we'll see you next week right here with more Saturday with Renee.